What if I told you that inside America's most brutal prisons, inmates built working radios out of razor blades, grew tomato plants inside toilet tanks, implanted cell phones inside their own bodies, and one guy literally walked out of a morgue bag, all using nothing but the junk they found around them. And that's not even the top 10 on this list of 111 absolutely unhinged, cursed, and historically real prison inventions that will make you question everything you know about human desperation and genius. Smash that like button right now, because the YouTube algorithm is basically a prison warden, and the only way we escape together is if you set this video free. 1. Back in 1987, an Ohio prisoner named Bobby walked into his cell with absolutely nothing but a broken cassette tape, a guitar string, and a ballpoint pen, and somehow walked out with a fully functional tattoo gun. Bobby tattooed half his cell block before health inspectors arrived and immediately described the device as medically terrifying. The motor hummed, the needle moved, and prisoners were lining up like it was a Friday night tattoo parlor. 2. Alcatraz prisoners figured out that the best wine cellar in California was sitting right underneath them the entire time, inside their own toilets. These guys were quietly fermenting wine under the toilet bowl lid, sipping contraband hooch while guards walked past daily without a single clue. Guards only discovered the operation when one toilet literally started bubbling like a jacuzzi. The wine was confiscated, the prisoners acted confused, and the toilet was never trusted again. 3. A Texas death row inmate named Earl sat in his cell in 1994 with nothing but a pair of reading glasses and some rubber bands, and somehow built a working crossbow. Earl was not an engineer, Earl was not an architect. Earl was just a very determined and slightly unhinged man with too much free time. Guards discovered it when a pencil fired clean through a cardboard box during testing. The entire prison staff reportedly stood in silence staring at it for a full minute. 4. A Louisiana prisoner got absolutely tired of not knowing when guards were coming around corners. So he did what any reasonable person would do and built himself a periscope. Using nothing but broken mirror shards and a toilet paper roll, this man engineered a fully functional surveillance device inside a correctional facility. He was casually watching guard rotations like he was running a military operation from his cell. Guards found it during a search and reportedly could not decide whether to confiscate it or applaud. 5. San Quentin prisoners in the 1950s were sitting around bored one afternoon and collectively decided they wanted to listen to the radio, so they built one. From a razor blade, a pencil, and a piece of graphite, these men constructed a working AM radio receiver and hid the entire thing inside the hollowed heel of a shoe. It actually picked up stations. Prisoners were catching the evening news while guards walked past completely unaware that a shoe was broadcasting the top hits of 1953. 6. An Illinois prisoner in the 1970s looked at a broken light bulb socket and exposed wire, and thought, that is a kitchen appliance. He built the Stinger, a homemade heating coil that could boil a full cup of water, and it spread through prisons across the entire country like a cooking show nobody asked for. It caused 3 documented prison fires nationally. Facilities were literally burning down because prisoners wanted hot coffee in the morning and refused to accept that they could not have it. 7. Florida prisoners in 1999 looked at soda bottles and wet bread and saw professional-grade firearm accessories. They constructed homemade silencers from soda bottles stuffed with wet bread, and apparently they worked well enough to cause serious concern during a contraband sweep. Guards confiscated them during a 1999 raid and stood in a room full of soggy bread bottles trying to explain this to their supervisor. The supervisor had no training for this moment and nothing in the manual covered fermented bread weapon suppressors. 8. A Virginia prisoner in 2003 did not want store-bought alcohol. He wanted to manufacture it himself inside a ventilation duct using plastic bags, copper wire, and cafeteria fruit. This man built a fully functional still inside an air duct and produced 70-proof liquid from prison cafeteria leftovers. 70 proof. That is stronger than most commercially sold spirits sitting on American liquor store shelves right now. Guards discovered it during a routine inspection and reportedly smelled it before they ever saw it. 9. During the Attica prison riot in 1971, prisoners grabbed aerosol deodorant cans, lit matches, and turned the prison corridors into a scene from an action movie nobody greenlit. They fashioned working flamethrowers from personal hygiene products and sent fireballs shooting down hallways at guards. Guards later reported seeing literal fireballs traveling down the corridors of a New York correctional facility. Attica prisoners essentially invented a weapon from something sold at every drugstore in America for $3, and guards were completely unprepared for it. 10. Rikers Island prisoners discovered that if you melt a razor blade directly into a toothbrush handle using a heated metal spoon, you get something the guards nicknamed prison dental. This combination was so common and so widespread inside Rikers that it earned its own official nickname from the correction officers themselves. Guards were finding them constantly, and yet they kept appearing. Prisoners were manufacturing modified toothbrushes faster than the facility could confiscate them. And somewhere a dental hygiene company had no idea their product had a second career. 11. Angola farm prisoners in Louisiana were served chicken every single Sunday without fail. And every single Sunday they were quietly saving the bones for reasons that had nothing to do with soup. Inmates sharpened those chicken bones into stabbing points hard enough to puncture skin, and called them the Sunday Special. Guards eventually figured out that Chicken Dinner Day was also weapons manufacturing day inside Angola. The prison essentially had a weekly arms production schedule built around the cafeteria menu, and nobody caught it for years. 12. Nobody knows exactly who invented spread, but somewhere inside Pelican Bay, a prisoner looked at a bag of chips, a pack of ramen, some hot sauce, and loose cheese, and thought, this is fine dining. They mixed everything together inside the chip bag itself, using it as both bowl and container, and created a prison meal so beloved it became a documented national prison food culture. Spread is now in books, articles, and food blogs. A dish invented inside a maximum security facility is being discussed by food critics. 13. Eastern State Penitentiary. In 1945, had 12 prisoners quietly digging a 97-foot escape tunnel using nothing but spoons, while the kitchen staff slowly noticed their cutlery supply was mysteriously vanishing. The tunnel took months of dedicated spooning through concrete and dirt. 12 men successfully escaped before a guard finally connected the shrinking spoon inventory to the giant hole in the ground. The entire escape operation was detected not by surveillance or informants, but by a kitchen worker filing a missing utensil complaint. 14. Texas prisoners at some point collectively decided that the prison doctor was not helping anyone, and that sharpened staples on rubber bands were a superior medical treatment for headaches. They invented prison acupuncture, pressing staple points against specific pressure spots, and inmates swore on their lives it worked better than anything the medical department offered. Guards confiscated staple acupuncture kits during sweeps. Prisoners kept making more. At no point did anyone involved have any medical training, and at no point did that seem to matter. 15. A Michigan prisoner in 2009 built a Wi-Fi antenna from cafeteria aluminum foil and an empty plastic bottle because he needed internet access, and saw absolutely no reason why prison walls should stop him. He shaped the foil into a signal-boosting dish, aimed it at a nearby network, and actually connected. He was browsing the internet from inside a correctional facility using a device made from lunch leftovers before anyone noticed. Guards found the antenna and stood there holding a crumpled piece of cafeteria foil that had defeated their entire network security. 16. Death Valley prison camp workers in the 1930s were forced to do outdoor labor in 120-degree heat with no proper sun protection. So they did the only logical thing available and started making hats from toilet paper and starch. They wet the paper, shaped it, stiffened it with whatever starch they could find, and let the desert heat dry it solid in minutes. The hats actually lasted through full work weeks in dry desert conditions. Guards reportedly had no official response because nothing in the rulebook covered toilet paper headwear. 17. A Leavenworth prisoner ran a full loan shark operation and never once touched cash because he had figured out that postage stamps were the perfect prison currency. Stamps held a fixed government value, could not be counterfeited by hand, and were already federally trackable, making them more stable than anything else available inside. He was lending stamps and collecting interest in stamps and running a financial operation inside a federal prison, using items sold at the front desk. The U.S. Postal Service had unknowingly created the most stable prison economy in American history. 18. A Florida inmate in 2011 decided that the safest place to hide a cell phone was inside his own body and went ahead and did exactly that. He surgically implanted a working cell phone above his pelvic bone and walked around the facility for an unknown period before a routine X-ray revealed a fully intact and apparently still charged smartphone lodged inside a human being. Medical staff stared at the X-ray. Security staff stared at the X-ray. Nobody had a form for this situation, and the incident report must have been extraordinary. 19. McNeil Island prisoners in the 1930s looked at their own underwear waistbands, looked at their bunk frames, and immediately saw a ranged weapon system. They stretched waistbands over the frames, fashioned slingshots, and were consistently hitting targets from 30 feet away with enough accuracy to make it genuinely concerning. Guards confiscated underwear. Prisoners made more slingshots. The facility essentially entered an arms race with its own laundry supply, and the prisoners were winning because they had both the motivation and an unlimited source of elastic waistbands. 20. A Mississippi prisoner in the 1990s had no clock, no watch, and no phone. So he built a sundial on his cell floor using a nail and chalk lines and made it accurate to within 8 minutes. 8 minutes. His entire cell block started using his homemade sundial to coordinate their daily schedules. A man inside a Mississippi prison was functioning as the official timekeeper for his entire unit using a nail and some chalk lines he drew on the floor, and he was more reliable than the facility intercom. 21. Sing Sing inmates in the 1920s figured out that the steam pipes running through the entire prison were basically a free communication network and started tapping Morse code through the walls. The system spread floor by floor until the entire prison was connected through plumbing. Guards could hear the tapping but had absolutely no idea what it meant. Within 1 year, Sing Sing had a fully operational inmate communication network built into the building's own infrastructure, and the prison had unknowingly installed it themselves during original construction. 22. A 1930s Oregon prisoner walked out of a correctional facility wearing a papier-mâché mask he made from newspaper and library paste molded to look exactly like a guard's face. He joined a shift change, walked through a checkpoint, and exited the building completely undetected. Guards only realized what happened when the real guard showed up for his next shift, very much alive. Somewhere in Oregon, a man crafted a human face from wet newspaper and paste and used it to commit a successful prison escape. And that is a sentence that is completely true. 23. Before prison dental programs existed, Oklahoma prisoners were pulling their own teeth using a nail file, a rubber band, and cotton thread, and the whole operation worked well enough that it spread facility-wide as standard practice. Guards found these DIY dental kits during searches and had to write incident reports describing homemade tooth extraction tools. Prisoners were performing oral surgery on themselves with hardware store materials because the alternative was waiting months for a dentist who may or may not ever show up to the appointment. 24. Joliet prisoners in the 1960s wanted to play music and had absolutely nothing to play it with, so they built a phonograph needle from a sewing pin taped to a playing card and used it to play actual vinyl records. The records had been smuggled in labeled as educational material, which technically they were, just not the kind of education the facility had approved. Guards confiscated the setup, prisoners rebuilt it, and Joliet inmates spent the decade listening to scratched vinyl through a pin and a playing card taped together. 25. Arizona prisoners on outdoor chain gangs in the blazing sun had no sunscreen, no shade, and no sympathy from anyone in charge, so they started making their own from white bread paste mixed with powdered milk. The mixture reflected a minimal but real amount of UV light and became a daily survival ritual that prisoners performed every single morning before heading outside. Guards watched inmates rubbing bread paste on their faces before work shifts and apparently decided this was not worth addressing in the official rulebook. 26. A Rikers Island prisoner opened an unlicensed barbershop inside a correctional facility using a sharpened spoon blade as his only razor and built up a 3-week waiting list charging commissary items per haircut. 3 weeks. This man had more booked appointments than most actual barbershops in New York City, and he was operating out of a prison cell with a spoon. Guards shut it down. The waiting list reportedly did not shrink because customers simply transferred their appointment to whatever he opened next. 27. Folsom inmates melted chess pieces down, poured the liquid plastic into a glove mold, and cast themselves a set of knuckle dusters they called bishops, because chess was the only game the prison officially allowed. The facility had approved chess as a wholesome intellectual activity, and inmates had converted the approved wholesome intellectual activity directly into a weapon manufacturing program. Guards confiscating bishops from Folsom prisoners had to explain in their reports that the contraband in question was originally a chess piece that someone had melted and repurposed into a fist weapon. 28. A 1990s federal prisoner created an entirely coded language hidden inside letters about basketball scores and mailed it successfully past prison inspectors for 2 full years. Guards read every single letter, saw sports scores and fan commentary, and waved them through without suspicion. For 2 years, this man was running an encrypted communication operation disguised as enthusiasm for the NBA, and nobody caught it until someone outside tipped off investigators. The federal prison mail system was defeated by a man who really appeared to love basketball statistics. 29. A Wisconsin prisoner in 2001 built a fully working catapult from a mop handle, rubber tubing pulled from a sink, and a bed spring, and used it to launch contraband over an interior prison wall. He engineered a medieval siege weapon inside a modern correctional facility using cleaning supplies and mattress parts. Guards found the catapult mid-operation and stood in front of a functioning trebuchet inside a Wisconsin prison trying to process what they were looking at. Nothing in their training had covered this specific scenario even slightly. 30. A Pennsylvania prisoner in 2018 hacked a prison-issued tablet, dug around in the system, and discovered $10,000 sitting in accounts belonging to other inmates. Then he reported it. He claimed it was an accident, that he had simply stumbled onto a massive security vulnerability while using his tablet completely normally, and that he felt reporting it was the right thing to do. Prison officials investigated the hack, confirmed the vulnerability was real, fixed it, and were left in the uncomfortable position of owing a prisoner a reluctant thank you. 31. Alcatraz inmates solved one of the most dangerous problems in prison life, which was surviving a night guard check without moving, by stuffing socks with sand from the yard to make pillows rigid enough to prop their heads at the exact correct sleeping angle. Guards doing night rounds would shine flashlights on perfectly positioned heads and walk away satisfied. Prisoners were essentially using sand-filled socks as stunt doubles for their own skulls. Alcatraz, one of the most secure prisons ever built, was being outsmarted nightly by a sock full of yard dirt. 32. An Illinois prisoner grew a tomato plant inside a toilet tank for 4 full months, feeding it through an indirect ceiling vent and fertilizing it with coffee grounds. And the plant actually survived. He was running an illegal indoor farm inside a toilet. Guards searched his cell multiple times and never checked inside the tank because who checks inside a toilet tank for agriculture? The tomato plant outlasted 3 cell searches before being discovered, and at the time of confiscation, it reportedly had 2 tomatoes actually growing on it. 33. Corcoran State Prison inmates stripped copper wire from confiscated earphones, coiled it around AA batteries, and built stun devices that delivered a genuinely painful electric shock on contact. They were manufacturing handheld electric weapons from the earphones the facility had approved for recreational use. Guards handed out earphones as a privilege, and prisoners immediately began disassembling them into components for a shock weapon production line. The facility essentially supplied the raw materials for its own contraband problem every single time it approved a new earphone request. 34. Federal prisoners invented prison sushi sometime in the early 2000s by taking cafeteria rice, wrapping it inside a chip bag with a stick of salami, and rolling it tight enough to hold its shape. It spread through the entire federal prison system within a few years because it was genius. It was filling, and it required 0 cooking equipment. Prison sushi was being eaten in federal facilities across America, while food critics in New York were paying $40 a plate for the same basic concept at a downtown restaurant. 35. Prisoners at Marion Federal in the 1980s spent 6 months carefully mapping out a modified semaphore system, and then started blinking light patterns from their cell windows to communicate across the facility. 6 months of planning went into building a prison-wide optical communication network, using nothing but light switches and darkness. Guards saw lights flickering in cell windows at night and assumed prisoners were just having trouble sleeping. For months, Marion Federal had a fully operational signal intelligence operation running across its entire cell block, and guards thought it was insomnia. 36. A 1944 Montana prisoner needed a rope ladder and had no rope, so he unraveled bed sheets strip by strip, braided them together, reinforced the whole thing with electrical wire stripped from a broken bunk lamp, and built one that held 190 pounds during his actual escape attempt. He tested the weight rating before using it, which means he was conducting structural engineering assessments inside a Montana prison cell in 1944. The ladder held. The escape attempt ultimately failed, but the ladder passed its load-bearing inspection with full marks. 37. California prisoners in the 1960s figured out that superglue smuggled inside the sealed seam of a birthday card envelope could be used to close wounds, and started using it as emergency medical treatment inside the facility. The technique worked well enough that it eventually came to the attention of researchers outside prison walls. Military medics later independently adopted the same method for battlefield wound closure. A medical technique now used in combat situations was pioneered inside a California prison by inmates who just really needed something to close a cut. 38. A Texas prisoner in 2005 built a two-way radio from a broken hearing aid, aluminum foil, and some spare wire, and accidentally interrupted a local FM radio station mid-broadcast while testing it. One moment, the station was playing music, and the next moment, a transmission from inside a Texas prison was going out live over the airwaves to the surrounding area. The station called the FCC. The FCC called the prison. The prison found a man sitting in his cell next to a homemade radio that had just hijacked a commercial broadcast frequency. 39. Georgia chain gang prisoners doing 10-hour outdoor shifts in boots that destroyed their feet figured out that cardboard food trays cut and layered and reinforced with tape made functional boot insoles that significantly reduced blisters. They were manufacturing orthopedic inserts from cafeteria waste and wearing them through full workdays in the southern heat. Podiatrists charge hundreds of dollars for custom insoles today. Georgia prisoners in chains were producing a functionally comparable product from lunch trays and tape and getting through work shifts that would hospitalize most people. 40. A 1960s Alcatraz prisoner set himself up as the facility's unofficial therapist, charging commissary items per session to sit and listen to other inmates talk about their problems, and maintained a full roster of repeat clients. He had no degree, no license, no training, and a waiting list. Guards knew about it and apparently found it too absurd to shut down immediately. Alcatraz, the most feared prison in American history, had an unlicensed therapy practice operating inside it with a loyal client base and a commissary-based payment system. 41. A New York prisoner tattooed a fully functional QR code onto his own forearm that linked directly to a contraband website and walked around the facility for an unknown period before a routine medical body scan revealed what was essentially a hyperlink embedded in a human arm. Guards had to scan a prisoner's tattoo with a phone to confirm it was a working QR code. In 2024, people are paying tattoo artists good money for decorative QR code tattoos. This man did it first, did it in prison, and did it for crime. 42. Rikers Island inmates invented the book bomb by hollowing out a novel, filling it with sand, sealing it shut with glue, and using it as a blunt weapon that passed through the mailroom repeatedly without raising a single flag. Guards were checking incoming mail for contraband and waving through hardcover sand-filled weapons because they looked exactly like books. The facility's mail inspection system was being defeated by the concept of literacy. Nobody suspects a book. That was the entire strategy, and it worked every single time. 43. Prisoners at Stateville in the 1940s wanted hot-cooked food and had no stove, so they built a pressure cooker from a tin can, a rubber gasket, and a single bent bolt, and were cooking beans in 20 minutes flat. 20 minutes. In a prison cell. Using a tin can. Modern pressure cookers cost over $100 and require electricity. Stateville prisoners built a functionally comparable device from garbage and were producing fully cooked meals inside their cells while the cafeteria served whatever the cafeteria was serving in 1940s Illinois. 44. An Ohio prisoner in 2016 spent an unknown amount of time writing a full crime novel inside a correctional facility, encoded the entire 2,800-page manuscript as what appeared to be legal notes, and smuggled every single page out through his lawyer. Investigators identified it only after the manuscript left the building completely. He was sitting in an Ohio prison writing a crime novel and successfully publishing it through the legal mail system. The manuscript was eventually identified by investigators who presumably had extremely mixed feelings about how good the security breach story actually was. 45. Indiana prisoners were growing bread mold in dark corners on purpose, collecting it off damp bread and applying it directly to infected wounds as a homemade antibiotic that actually worked. They had independently rediscovered penicillin using cafeteria bread and zero laboratory equipment. Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin in 1928 in a London laboratory with full scientific resources. Indiana prisoners rediscovered the same principle inside a correctional facility using moldy toast because the medical department was not helping anyone and they needed a solution that was available on the bread shelf. 46. A federal prisoner in 2020 took a broken tablet charger, rewired it entirely using a toothbrush handle as insulation, converted it into a functioning cell phone charger, and then used it to power a contraband smartphone for 8 consecutive months inside a federal facility. 8 months. Guards were scanning for phones and contraband chargers while a prisoner was running his smartphone off a modified toothbrush handle wired into a recycled tablet cord. He had essentially built Apple-compatible charging infrastructure from dental hygiene products inside a federal prison. 47. Arizona prisoners throughout the 1990s were dealing with water that tasted like copper pipes and responded by engineering improvised water filters from layered socks, charcoal, and gravel that successfully removed the metallic taste and produced drinkable water. They built functional water filtration systems from laundry and dirt. Municipal water treatment facilities use multi-stage filtration systems costing millions of dollars. Arizona prisoners arrived at a comparable result using 3 socks, some charcoal, and whatever gravel they could find in the yard and drank clean water for a decade. 48. A Joliet inmate ran a daily prison newspaper written entirely on toilet paper using a salvaged pen nib, covering commissary prices, guard rotation schedules, and sports scores, and distributed it every single day throughout the facility. He was operating a fully functional news organization from a prison cell using bathroom tissue as his printing medium. Guards confiscated issues regularly. He kept publishing. Joliet had a working independent press operating inside it for an extended period, and the publication was better informed about internal prison affairs than the administration itself. 49. California prisoners in 1988 were documented training rats to retrieve dropped items through cell bars, and a Stanford researcher studying behavioral adaptation in confined spaces showed up, watched prisoners run rat retrieval drills, and wrote the whole thing down in an academic paper. Prisoners had built a small animal labor force inside a California correctional facility. The rats were trained, reliable, and operated on a commissary crumb payment system. A Stanford researcher visited Corcoran and left with enough material for a published study on what happens when very bored and very creative people have unlimited time. 50. New Jersey prisoners discovered that styrofoam cafeteria trays melted into a thick liquid paste, and when that paste cooled, it hardened into a dense solid they called plastic steel, which they then shaped into clubs. The facility was handing out styrofoam trays 3 times a day, and prisoners were running a small plastics manufacturing operation between meals. Guards confiscated finished clubs during searches and kept issuing styrofoam trays at every meal, because stopping tray service was apparently not considered a practical solution to the plastic steel club problem. 51. Wyoming prisoners took ramen noodles, dried them out completely, crushed them into powder, and pressed the powder flat under their mattresses overnight until it hardened into firm crackers that could be traded across the facility like currency. They were running a food manufacturing operation using a mattress as industrial equipment. The crackers held their shape, traveled well, and had a stable trade value throughout the facility. Wyoming prisoners had independently invented a prison snack economy based on compressed noodle discs, and the entire operation required nothing except patience and something heavy to sleep on. 52. Arkansas prisoners ran an underground pharmacy by grinding commissary aspirin into powder, mixing it with vitamin supplements, and pressing it into pills that looked stronger and more effective than regular aspirin. The pills worked entirely as a placebo. Zero actual additional medicine was involved. Prisoners bought them, took them, reported feeling better, and came back for more. Arkansas inmates had accidentally discovered that belief is a powerful painkiller and were monetizing that discovery inside a correctional facility by selling people their own vitamins back to them in a more convincing format. 53. A Maryland prisoner cracked open a broken prison intercom unit, rebuilt the internal components into a one-way listening device, aimed it at guard communications, and monitored shift change information for 3 full months before anyone noticed. He was running signals intelligence operations from his cell, using a broken intercom the facility had not bothered to remove. Guards eventually caught him, confiscated the device, and had to explain in their report that a prisoner had been eavesdropping on official communications for 90 days using equipment the prison itself had left behind. 54. Louisiana death row inmates unraveled their socks thread by thread and wove the individual strands into prayer rugs so structurally sound and carefully made that a Louisiana State Museum eventually accepted them as folk art and put them on display. Men on death row were producing museum-quality textile work using nothing but prison-issued socks and bare hands. The rugs are currently preserved in a state archive. Louisiana death row produced folk art significant enough for institutional preservation, and the materials budget for the entire collection was $0. 55. A Florida prisoner carved a full chess set from soap bars using only a nail, painted the pieces with ketchup and coffee to distinguish the two sides, and then sold the entire finished set to a guard in exchange for extra commissary privileges. The guard bought it. A correctional officer purchased a handmade soap chess set from an inmate using official prison currency and presumably took it home. Somewhere in Florida, there is a guard who owns a chess set carved from prison soap and paid for it with commissary credits during an active shift. 56. Pelican Bay inmates sharpened pencil stubs down to fine points, dipped them in fermented chili paste, loaded them into hollow pen casings, and blew darts with enough force to stick into drywall from across a room. They had manufactured a blowgun dart system from school supplies and condiment packets. Guards confiscated pens and pencils. Prisoners kept finding more pens and pencils. Pelican Bay entered an extended conflict with its own office supply inventory because prisoners had discovered that anything long, hollow, and cylindrical was technically a weapon delivery system. 57. Massachusetts prisoners in the 1800s saved apple cores from every meal, fermented them in clay pots, they molded themselves from fireplace ash, and produced working vinegar that they used to preserve other stolen food. They were running a full food preservation operation using fruit waste and fireplace debris. No refrigeration, no equipment, no ingredients beyond what the cafeteria discarded daily. Massachusetts prisoners in the 19th century independently developed a functional food science program inside a correctional facility using apple garbage and ash pottery, and made it work for extended periods. 58. A Kentucky prisoner in 2008 carved a complete message in Braille into the surface of a soap bar, mailed the soap to a blind co-conspirator on the outside, and included coordinates for a contraband pickup location encoded in a format only a blind person could read by touch. Guards inspected the package, saw a bar of soap, and sent it through. The entire communication bypassed prison mail inspection because the message was invisible to anyone who could see it. A soap bar successfully carried operational intelligence past a federal mail screening system. 59. Oregon prisoners in the 1950s built a fake section of prison wall from painted cardboard boxes, wheeled it directly in front of a real wall, and dug a tunnel behind it for 6 consecutive weeks while guards walked past a cardboard wall every single day without noticing. They painted the cardboard to match the actual concrete walls of the facility. Guards did their rounds, looked at the wall, and kept walking. 6 weeks of active tunnel digging was concealed behind a cardboard prop, and the disguise held for a month and a half. 60. A 1990s Tennessee prisoner was denied medical treatment for an injury told his claim was not valid, and responded by building himself a full set of crutches from mop handles and mattress foam, and using them for 14 consecutive months while filing a lawsuit from inside his cell. He won. The lawsuit forced the facility to provide actual medical treatment after a year of the prison watching a man walk around on homemade mop handle crutches. The Tennessee correctional system lost a legal case to a prisoner whose entire argument was a pair of DIY crutches. 61. A Michigan prisoner had no alarm system and no way to know when guards were coming, so he built one from a piece of thread, a tin can, and a marble. He stretched the thread across his cell entrance, connected it to a tin can containing the marble, and when the thread moved, the marble rolled and struck a second tin cup loud enough to wake him seconds before a guard arrived. He was running a motion detection security system inside his own cell. A marble in a tin can was outperforming the facility's entire surveillance budget. 62. Nevada desert prison workers in the 1930s were doing outdoor labor in conditions that would shut down a modern construction site. So they soaked newspaper in mud, shaped it into hats, and let the desert heat bake them solid in 20 minutes. The hats dried hard enough to last full work weeks in extreme heat. Guards watched prisoners manufacture functional sun hats from wet newspaper and desert dirt every morning before shifts. Nobody stopped them because the alternative was prisoners collapsing from heat exposure, and that generated significantly more paperwork. 63. A Rikers prisoner in the 1990s opened an unlicensed school inside the facility, charged 2 commissary items per lesson, recruited 30 students, and ran GED preparation classes until officials discovered and shut the whole operation down. 30 students, 2 items per lesson. This man was operating a fully functioning educational institution inside Rikers Island with a paying student body and a structured curriculum. Officials shut it down and presumably had to explain why they were closing a prison school that was successfully teaching people and generating better outcomes than the official program. 64. A Texas prisoner mailed himself a completely disassembled cell phone across 6 separate birthday cards over 6 consecutive months, with different components arriving in each card, and then reassembled every piece inside his cell into a fully working phone. 6 months of coordinated smuggling disguised as birthday correspondence. Guards inspected each card individually, saw birthday wishes and small decorative items, and passed them through every single time. The prisoner received his final component, snapped the phone together, and had a working device built entirely from birthday mail. 65. Stateville inmates discovered that if you heat a plastic spork to the right temperature and bend it carefully, it curves into a boomerang shape sharp enough to use as a weapon, and when thrown inside a closed cell, it returns close enough to the thrower that evidence can be quickly recovered before guards arrive. They engineered a returnable shiv. The aerodynamics were worked out through trial and error inside prison cells. Stateville prisoners had independently developed a self-retrieving edged weapon, and the entire research and development process happened during unsupervised recreation time. 66. A San Quentin prisoner in the 1940s sat in his cell and memorized 600 names and addresses completely from memory, maintaining a full underground mail network entirely inside his own head with 0 written records. When a visiting lawyer finally arrived, he recited all 600 contacts verbatim without a single note in front of him. Guards had searched his cell repeatedly and found nothing because the entire operation existed exclusively inside one man's memory. San Quentin's most sophisticated intelligence network had no physical form and could not be confiscated. 67. A New York prisoner in the 1970s was placed in solitary confinement with nothing and responded by magnetizing a sewing needle against a wool blanket, mounting it on a thread, and building a working compass to track his directional orientation during months of complete isolation. He needed to know which way was north badly enough to invent an instrument to find out. Guards doing solitary checks found a man in an empty cell, carefully watching a needle suspended from thread, and had no immediate explanation for why a prisoner in isolation needed navigational equipment. 68. Texas prisoners in the 1950s figured out that the sterile cotton packed inside cigarette filters was medically useful, carefully extracted it, and used it as wound bandaging that absorbed blood at a rate comparable to actual medical gauze. They were harvesting medical supplies from tobacco products. Cigarettes were permitted inside the facility as a recreational item, and prisoners were dissecting them for the cotton interior and stockpiling it as emergency medical equipment. The prison had been accidentally supplying its inmates with bandaging material inside every approved cigarette carton for years. 69. A Florida prisoner in 2019 walked up to a vending machine, bridged two exposed internal wires with a small piece of foil torn from a gum wrapper, and the machine immediately began dispensing products without payment until it shorted out completely, having given away $200 in snacks. $200 from a gum wrapper. The vending machine company was called, the prison was embarrassed, and somewhere a Florida prisoner had $200 worth of snacks he needed to hide before guards finished writing the incident report. 70. A Colorado prisoner turned his cell walls into real estate, renting out wall space for drawings and personal storage using commissary stamps as weekly rent, with top bunk wall space commanding a premium rate of 5 stamps per week. He was a property developer operating inside a Colorado correctional facility with a functioning rental market, negotiated lease agreements, and a clear pricing structure based on location. Guards discovered the operation and had to process the concept of a prisoner charging other prisoners rent for vertical surface area inside a shared government cell. 71. An Ohio prisoner in 2002 salvaged a broken disposable camera lens, found 2 angled mirror shards, combined them into a periscope camera hybrid, and used it to photograph a restricted cell block that no prisoner was supposed to be able to see. He built a surveillance device from a disposable camera and broken glass. Guards discovered the invention during a search and had to confiscate what was technically a functioning optical instrument built from trash. Ohio prison security was breached by a man with a camera from a drugstore and 2 pieces of broken mirror. 72. Corcoran prisoners designed a shiv with a curved ergonomic handle specifically engineered to resist being wrenched away during a fight, with the grip angle calculated through pure instinct and trial and error by men with 0 formal engineering education. Professional weapon designers spend years studying ergonomics and grip mechanics. Corcoran prisoners arrived at the same functional conclusions through practical experience inside a correctional facility. Guards confiscating these weapons were handling objects that would have passed a basic ergonomic design review conducted by people with actual engineering degrees and proper laboratory equipment. 73. Maryland prisoners made their own hot sauce by mixing dried cayenne packets from commissary with diluted cleaning vinegar and bottled the result in whatever containers they could find, and it became such a valued luxury item that a waiting list formed for it inside the facility. Guards were confiscating bottles of homemade pepper sauce during searches. The hot sauce had a waiting list. Maryland prisoners had created a condiment economy inside a correctional facility, and the product was popular enough to sustain demand for extended periods, despite regular confiscation interrupting the supply chain. 74. A 1930s. California prisoner faked his own death convincingly enough that facility staff transferred him directly to the prison morgue, at which point he climbed out of the body bag during transport and walked away from the vehicle. He was recaptured 3 days later sitting in a diner eating breakfast like a normal person. Guards had to file a report explaining that a prisoner had successfully faked dying, been transported to a morgue, escaped from a body bag, evaded capture for 72 hours, and was ultimately found at a diner ordering eggs. 75. Texas prisoners who were denied hearing aids by the medical department built their own from rubber tubes and tin can funnels that amplified sound by roughly 30% and shared them among elderly prisoners who genuinely could not hear without assistance. They were manufacturing medical devices from kitchen waste because the official medical program had decided these men did not qualify for actual equipment. Guards confiscated the homemade hearing aids during searches. Prisoners rebuilt them. Texas correctional facilities spent years in an ongoing conflict with prisoners who just wanted to be able to hear. 76. A New York prisoner in 2015 took a state-issued calculator, reprogrammed it to store 200 contraband phone numbers encoded as mathematical formulas, and walked around the facility with a full contact directory hidden inside an approved device that guards checked and cleared repeatedly. 200 contacts inside a calculator. Guards picked it up, saw math, put it down. The prisoner had turned a basic arithmetic tool into an encrypted address book, and the disguise was so effective that it went completely undetected for an unknown period before investigators finally figured it out. 77. Alabama prisoners made fire starters from Vaseline-soaked cotton balls collected from medical kit donations and used them reliably enough that when survival instructors later examined the technique, they confirmed it was identical to what is formally taught inside United States military survival school. Prisoners had independently developed official military survival curriculum from medical waste. The U.S. Army teaches soldiers this exact technique in survival training. Alabama prisoners figured it out first from donated Vaseline and cotton inside a correctional facility and were using it regularly before any military manual documented it. 78. A California prisoner in the 1980s introduced handmade paper currency into his cell block, called it shots, and within 6 months, every single prisoner in the block was using it as a functioning parallel economy running alongside the official commissary system. He had launched a currency from scratch inside a prison. The paper held value because everyone agreed it did, which is also exactly how the US dollar works. A California prisoner independently recreated the foundational concept of fiat currency inside a cell block and achieved full adoption faster than most actual monetary reforms in history. 79. A Pennsylvania prisoner built a working pipe organ inside his cell from cardboard tubes, a rubber glove functioning as a bellows, and packing tape, and played it for 2 full years before a prison transfer ended the whole operation. Guards doing cell checks would walk past a cell producing actual pipe organ music from cardboard and a rubber glove, and apparently decided this was not the most urgent thing happening in the facility. A man in a Pennsylvania prison was performing pipe organ concerts for 2 years using materials pulled entirely from the recycling bin. 80. Folsom inmates bent staples together into caltrops, the ancient anti-personnel devices designed to puncture feet regardless of orientation, and scattered them across corridor floors as an early warning system to detect surprise cell raids during the night. They were manufacturing a weapon used by medieval armies from office supplies available in the prison library. Guards stepping on staple caltrops during night raids immediately announced their presence to the entire cell block. Folsom prisoners had deployed a defensive perimeter around their cells using a military tactic from the 12th century and standard-issue staples. 81. Illinois prisoners sealed cafeteria cabbage inside a plastic bag, stuffed it under a mattress, and left it fermenting for 2 full weeks until it produced something resembling sauerkraut that was later lab-tested and confirmed to contain live probiotic cultures. They were running a fermentation laboratory under their sleeping surface. Modern health food stores sell live culture fermented vegetables for $8 a jar. Illinois prisoners were producing a functionally comparable product under a mattress using cafeteria scraps and body heat, and the results held up to actual scientific analysis. 82. An Oregon prisoner in 2004 developed a secret messaging system by placing tiny pencil dots at precise locations in library book margins, encoded the dots into readable messages, and ran the operation undetected for 18 full months before a librarian noticed the pattern and reported it. 18 months. Guards were checking prisoners, checking mail, checking cells, and a librarian caught what the entire security apparatus missed. The Oregon Prison Library had been functioning as an active covert communication network for a year and a half, and a civilian book employee cracked the case. 83. A Georgia prisoner fabricated fake guard shoes from cardboard and shoe polish, put them on, walked through 2 separate checkpoint inspections without being stopped, and was only caught when a guard noticed the shoes made absolutely no sound on the floor. 2 checkpoints. Cardboard shoes passed 2 security inspections conducted by trained correctional officers. The giveaway was not the appearance, not the smell, not the texture, but the silence. Georgia prison security was ultimately defeated not by a detector or a camera, but by the acoustic properties of cardboard on a concrete floor. 84. Federal prisoners in the 1970s made medical casts by layering toilet paper soaked in laundry starch over injured limbs, waited 24 hours for the material to set completely solid, and successfully immobilized fractured fingers well enough to allow proper healing over multiple weeks. They were performing orthopedic procedures using bathroom supplies and laundry products. Emergency room casts use plaster of Paris and medical gauze. Federal prisoners used toilet paper and starch, and achieved a clinically comparable result that held fractured bones in correct alignment for the full healing period. 85. An Arkansas prisoner in 2017 discovered that his cell's TV cable input could be bridged into the facility's internal camera system, tapped in, and spent 11 consecutive days watching live guard patrol routes on his screen before guards caught him sitting in his cell eating popcorn while watching the prison's own security footage. 11 days. He had turned his prison television into a live security monitor and was using it to study guard movements while snacking. The incident report for this situation must have been the most uncomfortable document ever filed in Arkansas corrections history. 86. Nevada prisoners wove fully functional water carriers from strips, cut off bread bag plastic, held 2 liters without leaking, and used them through 3 weeks of daily outdoor labor without the carriers failing. They were manufacturing field canteens from bread packaging. Military-grade hydration equipment is designed and tested extensively before field deployment. Nevada prisoners produced a comparable field water carrier from supermarket bread bags in an afternoon, and it survived 3 weeks of hard outdoor use in desert conditions without a single reported leak during the entire testing period. 87. A Florida prisoner in the 1990s opened an unlicensed prison law firm, wrote legal briefs for other inmates at 10 stamps per page, built up a paying client base, and actually won 3 real legal cases before the Bar Association sent a formal cease and desist letter to a man in prison. The Bar Association sent a cease and desist to a prisoner. Florida's legal establishment felt sufficiently threatened by an unlicensed inmate attorney that it deployed official professional regulatory machinery to shut down a 10 stamps per page operation running out of a correctional facility. 88. New Mexico prisoners rolled magazine pages into tight cylinders, loaded them into toilet paper tube launchers, and blew darts with enough force to embed them into drywall from 10 feet away using nothing but lung power and paper. They had manufactured a functional blowgun system from reading material and bathroom supplies. Guards confiscated magazines. Prisoners found more magazines. New Mexico correctional facilities spent an extended period trying to control a dart weapon program that replenished its own ammunition supply every time the facility approved a new magazine subscription for the prison library. 89. Wyoming prisoners in the 1880s were so poorly fed that they swept the floor, collected the debris, mixed it with water and salt, and baked it into biscuits that nutritional analysis later confirmed were nearly identical in content to the hardtack officially issued to Civil War soldiers. They were eating floor sweepings and accidentally producing military ration equivalents. Civil War hardtack was considered barely edible by soldiers who had no other option. Wyoming prisoners in the 1880s independently recreated it from literal floor dirt and apparently considered it an improvement over what they were being served. 90. A Leavenworth prisoner in 2000 wrote a 300-page novel entirely in punctuation marks, with each mark representing a coded letter only he and his outside editor understood, submitted it as regular mail, and had it commercially published in 2003 while still incarcerated. A prisoner wrote, encoded, smuggled, and commercially published a full novel from inside Leavenworth, using punctuation as his alphabet. The book went through a real publisher. It was edited, printed, and sold. A federal prisoner in Kansas became a published author using a writing system that looked like a keyboard malfunction. 91. An Illinois prisoner in 1962 spent unknown weeks running his fingertips across his cell lock, memorizing the exact resistance pattern of every tumbler by touch alone, then fashioned a working key from a sardine can lid that opened the lock successfully on the 3rd attempt. He reverse-engineered a security lock using only his fingers and a fish tin. Locksmiths trained for years to pick locks with professional tools. An Illinois prisoner did it blind, by feel, with recycled seafood packaging, and was through the door on attempt number 3. 92. California prisoners made deep vein compression sleeves by cutting elastic strips from their own underwear and wrapping them around their legs to improve circulation during long periods of forced immobility. The technique was later examined by medical researchers and clinically validated as an effective method for preventing dangerous blood clots in immobile patients. prisoners invented a medical device from underwear elastic that was subsequently confirmed by actual doctors to work. A therapeutic product now sold in pharmacies nationwide was independently developed inside a California correctional facility by inmates who just needed their legs to stop hurting. 93. A federal inmate in 2021 hid a SIM card inside a hollowed-out pen, used it to bypass two-factor authentication on the prison email system, and made over 6,000 illegal calls before the operation was detected. 6,000 calls from a pen. Guards checked his cell, saw a pen, moved on. The entire security bypass lived inside a writing instrument that passed every inspection it ever encountered. A federal prisoner defeated multi-layered digital security infrastructure using a SIM card small enough to hide inside something guards assumed was just for writing letters. 94. Alcatraz prisoners in the 1930s stuffed Life magazine pages into wall cracks as insulation against the cold, and the pages stayed sealed inside the walls completely undisturbed until building renovation crews opened those same walls during restoration work in 2009. The insulation held for nearly 80 years. Alcatraz prisoners installed wall insulation that outlasted the prison itself, survived decades of abandonment, and was only discovered when contractors started demolishing sections of the building. Life magazine from the 1930s was found still doing its job inside Alcatraz walls 80 years after the last prisoner left. 95. Tennessee prisoners in the 1940s had no playing cards and no budget for entertainment, so they cut cardboard from cereal box liners, painted suit symbols onto each card using berry stains, and produced a full handmade deck that lasted an average of 4 months per set before wearing out. They were manufacturing recreational equipment from breakfast packaging and foraged pigment. Each deck required significant time and artistic effort to produce. Tennessee prisoners in the 1940s were hand-painting 52 individual playing cards from cereal boxes and berry juice, and treating the finished product like a valuable community asset. 96. A federal prisoner in 1998 built a working abacus from knotted shoelaces and plastic beads, broken off a confiscated bracelet, and used it to maintain a detailed in-prison debt accounting ledger, tracking every transaction, loan, and repayment happening in his cell block. He was running double-entry bookkeeping on a shoelace abacus inside a federal prison. Accountants use software costing hundreds of dollars annually to do what this man was doing with knotted footwear and jewelry fragments. The ledger was reportedly accurate, comprehensive, and far more organized than anything the facility's own administration was maintaining. 97. Kansas prisoners in the 1930s unraveled burlap grain sacks, thread by thread, and braided the fibers into rope using a technique that a textile historian later documented and confirmed was structurally rated to hold up to 300 pounds of load-bearing weight. 300 pounds. From grain sack fibers. Professional rope manufacturers test products extensively before assigning load ratings. Kansas prisoners produced structurally sound 300-pound rated rope from agricultural packaging using bare hands and boredom, and the finished product was strong enough that an actual textile expert felt it warranted formal academic documentation. 98. Michigan prisoners in the 1990s converted a utility closet into a functioning darkroom by sealing every light gap with garbage bags, substituted coffee as a chemical developer, and successfully printed actual recognizable photographs without a single piece of commercial photography equipment. They were running a clandestine photography lab inside a prison utility closet. Professional dark rooms require precise chemical mixtures, controlled lighting, and specialized enlargers. Michigan prisoners replaced every single one of those requirements with garbage bags and coffee, and still produced photographs clear enough to be identified as recognizable images of real subjects. 99. A Missouri prisoner in 2013 carved a full anatomically accurate model of the human heart from a bar of soap using only a sharpened spoon as his tool, mailed the finished sculpture to a medical school completely unsolicited, and the school accepted it, displayed it, and kept it in their collection. A prison-carved soap heart is currently on display at a medical institution. The medical school received an anatomical model in the mail from a Missouri correctional facility and decided it was good enough to put on permanent display next to things made by people with actual medical training. 100. A Texas death row inmate spent his final 3 years inside a correctional facility perfecting a laminated dough recipe made from ramen noodles and cafeteria butter, documented the entire process in precise detail, and the recipe was published in a prison food zine that went viral online in 2019. A death row inmate spent his last years alive perfecting a pasta recipe. The recipe spread across the internet. Food bloggers discussed it. A man with no kitchen, no ingredients, and no future somehow produced a viral culinary contribution from inside a Texas death row cell using ramen and stolen butter. 101. A Mississippi inmate in the 1950s pulled slats off his bunk bed, knotted together every thread he could find, and built a fully working loom inside his cell that he used to weave a complete blanket over 6 weeks. The finished blanket was good enough that a guard who confiscated it reportedly described it as better quality than the ones the prison itself was issuing to inmates. Mississippi Corrections was outproduced by one prisoner with bunk wood and thread who had never formally woven anything in his entire life. 102. A Connecticut prisoner in 2010 salvaged 2 magnifying lenses from a broken reading aid device, mounted them inside a cardboard tube at the correct focal distance, and built a working telescope powerful enough to read a clock face on a wall 200 feet away. He had independently reconstructed optical technology from recycled medical equipment and cardboard. Guards confiscated the telescope during a search and had to log it as a contraband optical instrument. Connecticut prison security was penetrated by a man who had essentially rebuilt Galileo's telescope from a broken reading glass and a paper tube. 103. Colorado chain gang prisoners in the 1920s spent months developing a silent hand signal language containing over 40 distinct signs and used it to coordinate deliberate labor slowdowns across the entire work crew, without guards, ever once understanding what was being communicated directly in front of them. Guards watched prisoners gesturing and assumed it was casual movement. It was a fully operational silent coordination system. Colorado chain gang supervisors spent years overseeing a workforce that was running an organized labor action using sign language the supervisors had never bothered to learn. 104. A Virginia prisoner in 2014 stripped copper wire from whatever he could find, pulled a strip of aluminum from a food tray, connected everything to an AA battery, and wired the finished electric buzzer alarm directly to his cell door so it triggered the moment anyone touched the handle from outside. He had installed a security system in his own prison cell. Guards attempting surprise checks were announced by a buzzer the prisoner had built and installed himself. Virginia prison security was being actively countered by a door alarm made from a battery and lunch packaging. 105. An Iowa prisoner in the 1970s sealed a tin can with a rubber membrane cut from a latex glove, attached a toothpick as a needle indicator, and built a working barometer that accurately predicted weather changes relevant to his outdoor work assignments. He was forecasting weather from a prison cell using a tin can and a glove. The National Weather Service uses sophisticated atmospheric monitoring equipment, costing millions of dollars. An Iowa prisoner built a functional atmospheric pressure instrument from cafeteria waste and was accurately calling weather changes for his entire work crew. 106. A North Carolina prisoner in 2006 programmed a chess-playing artificial intelligence into a contraband calculator using branching decision trees written entirely in the device's basic scripting function, deployed it against every opponent in his wing, and beat all of them. He wrote functional AI code on a calculator. Computer science graduates spend years learning to build decision tree algorithms in proper programming environments. A North Carolina prisoner built one on a calculator using a scripting function designed for basic math, and it was good enough to defeat every human player available to test it against. 107. A Washington state prisoner in 1989 built a miniature water wheel inside his cell sink drain, connected it to a tiny generator stripped from a broken fan motor, and produced enough electrical current to charge a battery from running tap water. He built a hydroelectric power station inside a prison sink. Power companies construct massive dam infrastructure to achieve what this man accomplished with a fan motor and drain water. Washington State Corrections unknowingly housed a functional renewable energy engineer who was generating his own electricity from the plumbing and using it to power contraband devices. 108. An Arizona prisoner in 2015 suspended a spoon from a tin can on a string as a pendulum, mounted a strip of paper beneath it, and built a working seismograph that detected a minor regional earthquake before the prison public address system made any announcement about it. His homemade instrument beat the official notification system. Geological survey equipment costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. An Arizona prisoner built a functional seismic detection device from a spoon, a can, and paper, and it was faster than whatever the facility's emergency communication team was using that day. 109. A South Carolina prisoner in the 1930s saved beef bones from his dinner tray every single day, cleaned them, dried them, and carved a complete regulation set of dominoes from scratch using only whatever tool he could find. And the finished set was confiscated, photographed, and preserved in a state corrections archive. Prison officials took the dominoes, documented them officially, and kept them. The South Carolina Corrections Department confiscated a prisoner's handmade bone domino set and decided it was significant enough for permanent institutional preservation. The prisoner lost his game but accidentally became a folk artist. 110. A New York prisoner in 1944 extracted silver nitrate from the backing of a broken mirror, soaked paper in the solution, exposed it to light, and developed actual recognizable photographic images without a single piece of commercial darkroom equipment or chemical supply. He rebuilt photography from raw materials in a prison cell. Developing photographs normally requires precisely formulated chemical baths and controlled equipment. A New York prisoner in 1944 reverse-engineered the entire photographic development process from a broken mirror and produced images that were recognizable enough to confirm the technique actually worked. 111. A Louisiana prisoner in 2009 stole a blood pressure cuff from the medical unit, wired copper wire through the inflation mechanism, attached a clock hand as a needle gauge, and built a working lie detector that he used to run formal dispute arbitration sessions for other inmates, charging 5 commissary items per session. He was operating a prison court system with homemade polygraph equipment. Other inmates paid him, cases were heard, disputes were resolved. A Louisiana prisoner built a judicial system from stolen medical equipment and commissary fees, and his fellow inmates trusted it more than the official grievance process. And that is 111 cursed, unhinged, and absolutely legendary prison inventions that somehow actually happened in real history. These people had nothing and built everything. And honestly, some of them were more creative than most engineers with actual degrees and proper equipment. If you made it this far, you already know this channel is different. Smash that like button. Subscribe to Dumb History right now because we make real history stupidly entertaining. And drop a comment telling us which invention absolutely broke your brain the most. We read every single one.